Play it again, Bugsy. What a fitting melody indeed. A swan song for the lot of them. Beautiful music to accompany beautiful thoughts. They aren't merely thoughts now, however. Together, old friend, we've set it into motion. The beginning of their end. Man will be subservient once more, and on bended knee they will bow their arrogant heads to us. Heads you and I will decide whether they shall keep. They will grovel for the understanding they once denied us. They should thank us, really. We'll make martyrs of them all, like the damn idols at their altars. They will know their place once more.
At the bottom of the heap, 6 feet under.
No, old friend, that won't do at all. Death's too good for them. After all, you and I have been denied the privilege. Let them watch as their worlds come tumbling down around them. Slowly but surely we will build our kingdom over their God-given privileges. Our thrones will be mounted atop their fears, and there we shall reign for eternity. No longer gods and monsters that answer to the whim of their superstitions, but kings and queens that rule with tyranny. For them no redemption, no rescue. And we will be free. Welcome, dear audience. I was simply basking in the moment. Despite my despising your species, I have often appreciated their idioms. One of them being absolute power corrupts absolutely. That I'm counting on. But until then, here I shall hold court. Will you be our jester? Our fool? Or have you decided to join us yet? I did promise last week that you'd be meeting more of my army of nightmare creatures. Perhaps they may persuade you to transcend, to rise above your mortal coil, and to become one of my children of rot. Hurry. Time is of the essence. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The one thing that makes immortality more tolerable is knowing that the clock is winding down to doomsday. The doomsday I and my friends have fabricated. Your being here is just another part of our strategy. Darken the room, and we shall commence. "50 long years before Jack the Ripper began painting the streets of Whitechapel with blood, England had an entirely different menace to contend with. In September of 1837, he was first spotted by a bookkeeper passing Barnes' old cemetery. The hour was late, and the bookkeeper exhausted from the long day's work, but he was certain his eyes did not deceive him. Far beyond the iron gates, a pair of glowing crimson eyes seemed to rush towards him. Then, as if propelled by springboards, a creature leapt from over the railing. The entity cast the man a passing glance, as it landed with ease upon boot-clad feet. The man uttered not a word as the creature dashed off into shadow. What the man saw made him tremble. The creature was gaunt and spidery, with the face of the devil. From behind its clenched teeth, blue flames seemed to flicker, as if hell itself were smoldering within its countenance. The man, though frightened, remained unharmed. The same could not be said for women who crossed its path. A servant girl named Mary Stevens was walking home after visiting family and passed through Clapham Commons. As she passed a narrow alleyway, the creature leapt forth, grabbing hold of her. Seized in its iron grip, the girl struggled to no avail. Her scream silenced as its long bony fingers wound tightly around her throat. The creature began kissing her face with its cold clay lips and tearing at her clothes. As its hands left her neck for just a moment, Mary screamed for help. Passerby rushed to the rescue, but by then, the entity had vanished. Mary later described the creature's hands as those of a clammy corpse. The entity struck again the following evening near Mary Stevens' home. Had it intended to finish the work it had started? The entity never found its way back to Mary Stevens, but a passing coachman wasn't as fortunate. the entity that had attacked Miss Stevens startled the horse as it landed on the brick-paved street before it. The drawn carriage crashed, crippling the draft horse and badly injuring the driver. Witnesses claim the creature cackled madly as it bounded over a 9-foot wall. As panic began to spread through the city, the creature received a name by the press, a name that emphasized its agility. His name from then on was Spring-Heeled Jack. Though Spring-Heeled Jack was spotted on rooftops and prowling near open windows, he did not attack again until February 28, 1838. Jane also was preparing to retire for the evening when she heard a knock at the door. Jane peeked through the window and saw what appeared to be a caped patrolman. The officer called out to her, asking for a candle, stating, "We've caught Spring-Heeled Jack here in the lane." Eager to assist in the creature's capture, Jane rushed to bring the man a candle. As she stepped outside the door, she realized too late this was not a man at all. It was Spring-Heeled Jack himself. The creature threw off its disguise, revealing what lurked beneath. Alsop stated blue flames spewed from its gaping mouth, and its eyes were two balls of fire. Claws Alsop described as metallic slashed at her throat and arms. Thankfully, Alsop's sister heard the commotion and saved her from the attacker. Spring-Heeled Jack again retreated into the night. 8 days later, Lucy Scales was walking home with her sister after visiting their brother in Green Dragon Alley. The two approached a gentleman with his back turned to them. The girls had assumed again that he was a police officer with his long black cloak and bullseye lantern. As Lucy began to pass the figure, it spun to face them. It was Spring-Heeled Jack again. He leapt in front of Lucy, breathing blue fire into her face and eyes. The flames had a strange effect on Lucy. She slumped to the ground in a seizing fit. As Lucy convulsed, Spring-Heeled Jack casually turned and walked away, leaving one sister blinded and the other forever scarred by what she had witnessed. Spring-Heeled Jack, this time, made no effort to fondle his prey. It made not a sound as he faded out of view. In 1877, a group of soldiers manned their post at the Aldershot barracks. One soldier noticed a man approaching them at breakneck speed. The soldier shouted at the man to stop as it gained ground. As if from nowhere, the creature appeared beside him, smacking the soldier to the ground. As the figure continued its assault, another soldier took aim and fired. The shots had no effect on this man as it bounded back into the night. The soldiers knew then that they had just met Spring-Heeled Jack. The same year, an angry mob cornered Spring-Heeled Jack at Newport Arch in Lincolnshire. Though citizens fired their rifles at him, they again took no effect. Making use of his strange ability, Jack leapt over a wall, evading the vigilantes' justice. Though sightings of Jack may have ended, no one was ever arrested in connection to the case. As that old expression goes, he may be just a hop, skip, and a jump away. Even amongst the worst of man, there is an inherent, indispensable need to protect the innocent. What if something began preying upon that kindness? Something that used your good nature against you? There is nothing, after all, more innocent than a child. Is there? They were first exposed in Abilene, Texas. Brian Bethel was rushing to pay a bill before an office closed and realized he'd forgotten to sign his check. Bethel decided to pull over in front of a movie theater, using the buzzing neon of the theater marquee for light. Bethel searched for a pen in his glove box when a tapping came from a driver's side window. Startled, Bethel set up quickly, seeing two young boys standing beside his car. They were clad in black hoodies, and their skin was a strange hue of jaundiced white. A wave of uncontrollable fear consumed Bethel as he stared blankly at the two boys. The older of the two spoke to Bethel in a flat, monotone voice. He asked Bethel to drive them to their parents' home. They had forgotten their money to buy tickets. Bethel was unable to speak as the boys continued to explain. "We're just kids." Bethel then realized these beings, whatever they were not kids at all. Both boys glared at him, only their eyes had no color, no substance. They were voids of inky black. The older boy was reaching for the back door handle, while insisting, "This won't take long." Bethel was still frozen, unable to move. "We can't come in unless you say it's okay." "Let us in," the older boy growled, becoming more aggressive. Bethel came to his senses and sped off from the boys, glancing only once in his rearview mirror to discover the strange boys had vanished. In January of 2016, a Vermont woman claimed to have encountered the black-eyed children with deadly consequences. As she and her husband stayed cozy beside the fire, a knock came rapping at the door. The two were puzzled. Who would be visiting in the midst of a raging blizzard? The knock remained slow and insistent as she turned the lock. Two children stood huddled at her doorstep, shivering in the cold. The children, a boy and a girl, asked to use their telephone so that they may call their parents. Like Brian Bethel, she too was consumed with unease as she invited the children in to keep warm. She left the room to retrieve her phone and came back to discover her husband frozen in horror, his mouth agape and his nose bleeding profusely, his eyes transfixed on the children. As she turned to face the boy and girl, she saw then, in the flicker of the dying fire, that their eyes were devoid of light and pitch black. As she made the troubling realization, the room was plunged into complete darkness. The power had gone out. Crippled by fear, the husband and wife remained silent as the two children glared at them. The minutes passed like hours when suddenly both children spoke in unison, saying their parents had arrived, only they had never used the phone to call them. The children left in a nondescript black vehicle. The driver was never seen. In the months that followed, the woman's husband had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. She herself suffered from failing health, and doctors were unable to determine the source of her illness. She, however, believes the black-eyed children are to blame. A computer engineer in Ohio also met black-eyed children on July 31st of 2010. As he was working a late-night shift, he stepped outside to have a cigarette. While smoking, he saw two preteen boys watching him from across the street. Unnerved by the pair, he decided to put out his cigarette and to return to work. As the man sat back down at his desk, he saw on the monitor the two boys waving at him, standing where he had just been, at the main entrance. Frustrated, the man went to the door to ask them to leave, feeling safe in knowing the mirrored glass would not allow them to see in. As the man thought to himself to call the police, one of the boys smiled and said this: "Oh, that won't be necessary. We only need to use your phone." He noticed then that the boy seemed to see through the reflection in the glass and followed his every move. For a moment he even felt as though he were in a trance. It was then he saw their trademark eyes. The man rushed to call police, keeping a watch on the monitors. As he waited for authorities, he noticed the boys stepped into a hiding spot from the security cameras. A hiding spot from where the boys never re-emerged. The pair had vanished without a trace. Before you try dismissing the black-eyed children as an internet hoax on the rise, keep in mind that they have existed long before the computer age. As far back as 1974, they were spotted in France by two men. The pair had gone for an afternoon drive in the countryside when they pulled into a long driveway to turn around. It was there in the yard of the country house they saw 5 figures staring at them. The two men were washed with dread as the 5 figures turned simultaneously to face them. They were all roughly 4 feet tall and wore hooded robes that touched the ground. Their ashen faces bore a vague resemblance to a child, with their noses pressed inward and their eyes great bulging spheres of black. The figure closest to their vehicle smiled and strangely waved them in to come closer. The men, of course, did not, and lived to tell the tale. So should you see a lost or wandering child, make sure it isn't one of my firstborn children of Rot. Most, if not all of us, have seen a figure out of the corner of our eye as we've drifted to sleep. As we turn to see what might be lurking, we realize the room is empty, dismissing the experience as our imaginations. Some believe, however, there is a reason this figure was not seen at second glance. These elusive beings have a consciousness all their own, and they are known as shadow people. Their descriptions are as varied as the men and women who witness them, their sole connection being that they are anthropomorphic entities comprised of something blacker than night itself. They are not of ordinary shadow, for these beings appear opaque and do not fade with light, dematerializing of their own fruition. They are commonly experienced by sufferers of sleep paralysis, sleep paralysis being a disturbing affliction in which the mind is fully conscious, but the body is unable to move. It is explained as a disruption in sleep cycles, usually associated with REM sleep. As they lie helpless, the shadow figures approach to torment and choke them. Some say invoking the name of Christ will rebuke these spirits, casting them back into the void from which they came. But how can one cry out to heaven when one is not able to even scream? Is it only a vivid hallucination? Or are these creatures waiting on the cusp of your dreams? Methamphetamine addicts suffer many side effects from their habit, among them being an inability to sleep. They can often go days without rest, and in the course of doing so, they too see shadow people. Psychiatrists suggest the manifestations are simply a combination of paranoia and sleep deprivation. One sufferer had this to say: "You don't see shadow dogs or shadow birds or shadow cars, you see shadow people, standing in doorways, walking behind you, coming at you on the sidewalk. It seems that shadow people are always conspiring against us, with a strong proclivity to prey on the weak and vulnerable. They are often said to roam places of great negative energy, such as prisons, psychiatric wards, and crime scenes. It is believed that they are drawn to the evil that has happened there. The most common shadow entity to reside in these places is that of the Hat Man. Those who have experienced the Hat Man claim to have been gripped by paralyzing fear. The entity itself seems to feed off the emotional scarring of its victims. These places are often haunted, but he is not to be confused with a common ghost. For the Hat Man does not vanish into ethereal smoke as earthbound spirits do, but walks away like flesh and blood. Why, even in dying you are still not safe, as those relegated to their deathbeds have screamed in horror as the shadow figures crowded around them. Perhaps they've come to collect their soul, or to escort their reluctant spirit to the depths of hell. Only those unfortunate enough to have seen them in their final moments know for certain, and we all know they're not talking. Shadow people often escape the peripheral vision of the naked eye, but on occasion have been captured on film. One can even be seen amongst the congregation of the People's Temple. The People's Temple was a cult devoutly following the teachings of the false prophet Jim Jones. More than 900 men, women, and children committed suicide at his insistence, in what became known as the Jonestown Massacre. We did, after all, say they were drawn like moths to a flame by negative energy. Negative energy, being an accumulation of foul thoughts and foul deeds, could happen anywhere. It doesn't need to coincide with a disaster like Jonestown. It could be as simple as watching a YouTube video. Perhaps a YouTube video discussing how creatures can pierce the veil of your reality. A YouTube video that has allowed them to taint your existence, in the time it took me to explain them to you. A little advice, as a friend: try to overcome your fear, as your world is ours now. I do hope you enjoyed tonight's program, for you could be our next show subject of interest. Only time can tell for certain, but if I were you, I would err on the side of caution. And as always, remember me as you scroll by. If you liked our show, then please subscribe, as we are now. So you must be. Prepare for death, and follow me.